Welcome to my review for a game I'm very excited to talk about, and that is The Last of Us, developed by Naughty Dog.
Easy!
Please!
Holy shit!
Help!
Are we gonna help him?
Put your seatbelt on, Ellie.
Well, what about the guy?
He ain't even hurt.
Alone and forsaken by fate and by man. Oh Lord, if you hear me, please take my hand. Hope
After one of the darkest, tear-inducing openings in the history of video games, The Last of Us follows Joel, a smuggler, as he endures the cruel and harsh trials from a post-apocalyptic world that's been inhabited with fungi-infected humans and dangerous survivalists. However, after Robert, a gangster, sells off weapons that were meant to supply Joel and his partner Tess to the head of a rebellious militia group known as the Fireflies, Joel makes a deal with Firefly leader Marlene to get the weapons they so desire. But in return, Joel and Tess must smuggle a 14-year-old girl, Ellie, out of the quarantine zone of Boston and to the capital.
You weren't kidding about him.
Yeah, he's one of a kind.
Just like Naughty Dog's previous projects, Naughty Dog knows how to write story, dialogue, and characters like no other developer. Joel, Ellie, and all the other main characters that make appearances in The Last of Us feel jaw-droppingly real, and on more than one occasion I had to keep reminding myself that I was playing a video game and not watching a well-made film. But getting back to Joel and Ellie, I must say their relationship is really something. Out of the long history of video game duos, they are by far among the best. However, what's compelling is that their relationship is a little complicated. The two characters don't necessarily get along, which is where some of the seldom humor comes in. But what's so great about Joel and Ellie is that the two are like onions with multiple layers and character development that one doesn't typically see in a video game, and better yet, anywhere. But aside from characters which I could possibly base an entire review around, The Last of Us is one of the darkest, most well-thought-out stories ever conceived in video game history. And it's definitely not for the faint of heart. The Last of Us features a bleak, disturbingly harsh world that some might find slightly difficult to stomach. It's a world with very little hope, but if one can stick with it all the way through, the game story and overall experience is overly rewarding. Much like a filmmaker or longtime musician getting back to his or her roots and rediscovering what compelled that person to be a part of his or her chosen profession in the first place, this is Naughty Dog doing just that. In short, Uncharted is Naughty Dog's big-budget summer blockbuster, while The Last of Us is Naughty Dog's stripped-down art film. It's this kind of storytelling that's not often seen in a mainstream Hollywood production, and that's why The Last of Us works. Cut away from the mainstream and achieve results like no other, because when it comes to storytelling, Naughty Dog is in a league of their own. Taking the very best of elements from the Uncharted series and applying it to an all-new formula that is The Last of Us is what you get. In other words, there's the duck, cover, and shooting mechanics, but the main course mostly consists of stealth-like gameplay. However, the player can of course go in and take out the enemy's typical third-person shooter style, but the only problem is that ammo is incredibly limited. So if the player runs out the wrong time, the player will be forced to rely on silent takedowns, or worse, rushing in on opponents, which doesn't typically work too well. However, Naughty Dog has made it very easy to take the stealthy route, just as long as one is willing to comply. By simply holding down the R2 trigger, Joel can listen to his surroundings, and what this does is that it enables the player to see through walls and other structures. It's unlimited, and some might describe this as a cheat, which in fact kinda is, but it's something that's greatly needed, for otherwise the game would be frustratingly hard during some of the more chaotic circumstances that the game throws the player in. The Last of Us does offer a handful of upgradable assets. Health, weapon swing, Joel's hearing, and some others can all be upgraded by collecting supplements. But here my warning: for these supplements are very limited, so use them wisely. As for some other upgradable and customizable mechanisms in The Last of Us, the player can upgrade a variety of weapons that include a 9mm, revolver, shotgun, flamethrower, and others alike, while also crafting items such as health kits, homemade nail bombs, and Molotov cocktails. As for enemies, The Last of Us has a handful of different enemy types. There are the quarantine zone soldiers and the hunters. However, The Last of Us is a post-apocalyptic game, so one can definitely expect to run into some sort of Walking Dead. But in case you haven't been paying attention or have no prior knowledge of this game, which if that's the case then you're probably not watching this review anyway, The Last of Us does introduce the player to zombie-like enemies that bear resemblance to real-life cordyceps. Breaking up into three groups are the runners, which are the typical zombie type that everyone should be familiar with, clickers, which are blind and can only detect the player when noise is made. Now, for the most part, they're easy to avoid. However, when mixed with a pack of runners, they can be pretty tough to kill. That and the fact within one hit they will completely desecrate the player. but the most deadly and probably the ones I would recommend avoiding at all costs are the bloaters. Like clickers, they cannot see, but when they discover one's position, all hell breaks loose. The most effective way for putting the bloaters down is by either using the flamethrower or by using the homemade nail bombs. Within a couple of doses of those and a shotgun to the gut will certainly put the infected big guy out of his misery. All in all, The Last of Us's enemies aren't necessarily scary, but when being rushed by a bunch of runners, clickers, and a couple of bloaters in the mix with a lack of ammo can cause a little bit of panic, which creates a fun and sometimes challenging game. And on that note, I do want to mention how Ellie and other followers help the player. Unlike a trailer where followers would just fire off blanks, the followers in The Last of Us actually help. And not only will they help fight off enemies, but they will also replenish health and ammo. Now I will warn again that health and especially ammo is limited. So in other words, followers only replenish items here and there. But with that said, it's always nice to get a sudden surprise of ammo and health when it's needed the most. Besides the graphics being some of the best this console generation has ever seen, the visuals in The Last of Us have a dark, haunting beauty about them. Like I've stated before, The Last of Us introduces a world that's been torn apart by the infected and the humans themselves, and takes the player to a wide variety of locations such as long ago abandoned suburban homes, apartments, and cities, as well as forests filled with greenery and even snow. And speaking on the subject of snow, I don't think any other developer knows how to make snow look as good as Naughty Dog. The imprinting of footsteps and the way snow glistens in the sunlight is, for the lack of a better word, just awesome. And lastly, I have to give credit to the animations of characters. With the aid of motion capture from the voice actors, the animations are remarkably smooth and seamless.
What else did you get?
Well, here. This make you all nostalgic?
You know, that is actually before my time. That is winter, though.
First up, I had to give a notch to The Last of Us' sound design, which is just top notch. Whether that be from the sound of clickers overtaking the environment, or the ear-piercing bullet sounds from a shootout, the sound does a tremendous job by creating this quiet and especially haunting world. But what's also worth mentioning is Gustavo Santaolall's subtle yet effective score that primarily consists of little guitar riffs that fits in perfectly with the tone of the stripped down vibe that The Last of Us gives off so well. It's beautiful.
You're totally fucking with me.
I'm serious.
And finally, what would a great video game story be without great voice acting? Voice actors such as Brandon Scott, Najee Jeter, W. Earl Brown, Annie Wershing, and the always delightful Nolan North are all simply great. But the biggest standouts here are obviously Ashley Johnson, and especially Troy Baker, who gives quite possibly the best performance he has ever given. But above all, both are nothing short of fantastic in this.
Get down! Nice!
What I believed at first to be some sort of made-up rumor turns out to be a reality. The Last of Us, oddly enough, has multiplayer. Similar to The Last of Us's gameplay, the multiplayer is heavily stealth-based. In other words, the game insists that the player uses teamwork and move about the area while keeping a head down. Now, I will warn that the multiplayer isn't for everyone and takes heaps of practice before one can actually do any good. But when I started to upgrade my weapons and assets and became more familiar with the ways of the game, I started to have quite a fair amount of fun. Split up into two game types are Supply Raid and Survivors. Supply Raid is more like the typical team deathmatch, while Survivors is a game of elimination. Although some might argue that having only two modes is a bit underwhelming, I for one am happy enough to accept something that was a nice added bonus, because the main reason to buy The Last of Us isn't for the multiplayer, it's for the story. But I will say this, since The Last of Us's multiplayer is so different from the run-of-the-mill Call of Duty clone, I believe it will have a devoted fanbase for quite some time.
Right, it's called turnover.
And if you clear the 10 yards, then you're back at first down?
First down, that's right.
Man, that's confusing.
You just gotta play it a couple times. It all makes sense.
The Last of Us is a game that is a must-play for anyone who appreciates top-notch storytelling. In the past generation of movies, TV shows, and especially games, zombies and post-apocalyptic settings have been a huge hit. However, what sets The Last of Us apart from the others is that it's incredibly effective in what it sets out to achieve. The characters in The Last of Us feel like real people, and if one can achieve that in not just a game, but anywhere, then that's impressive. The Last of Us is just another fine example of where video games are heading. It's innovative, and it is, indeed, a form of great storytelling as well as art. I give The Last of Us the masterful score of a 5 out of 5. If you have a PlayStation 3, you'd be doing yourself a disservice not to play this. It's simply brilliant. Well everyone, that is my review for The Last of Us. I hope you enjoyed it. It is among the best games I've ever played, so I highly recommend it. And as always, I'm Colyn Kirkland, and thanks for watching.